The price of understanding everyone is being understood by almost no one. If you've ever felt like you can hear the emotions people don't say, but no one seems to hear you back, then you already know the hidden cost of emotional intelligence. Everyone praises empathy. Emotional intelligence is supposed to be the superpower of connection, the skill that guarantees deeper relationships, stronger bonds, better everything. But the truth no one talks about is this: the higher your EQ climbs, the lonelier it gets. Because once you can read between the lines of every conversation, you realize most people aren't even having conversations. They're repeating scripts, defending egos, projecting wounds. You can see all of it. And what do they see in you? A polite smile, a patient listener, a mirror they don't bother to look behind. Here's the hidden truth. The more fluent you become in other people's emotions, the less fluent they seem in yours. You understand them, they don't understand you. And slowly, what should have been the bridge to connection becomes the wall that separates you. Think about it. You hear the fear under the anger, you catch the longing behind the sarcasm. You know what drives people even when they're lying to themselves. But when you try to explain your own depth, your own complexity, it lands flat. Blank stares, polite nods, or worse, the accusation that you're too sensitive, too intense, too much. It feels like being the translator in a foreign land. You can help everyone else communicate, but no one speaks your language. And that role over time gets lonely, because interpreters rarely get to tell their own story. This is the paradox of high emotional intelligence. The deeper your understanding grows, the fewer people you can share it with. Until one day you realize, being able to feel everyone doesn't mean you belong anywhere. And that is where we begin. High emotional intelligence is supposed to be the ultimate key to connection. Psychologists describe it as the ability to recognize, understand, and manage emotions, both your own and other people's. It's marketed as the secret to better leadership, healthier relationships, deeper intimacy. And to a point that's true, but what almost no one tells you is this: the higher your EQ climbs, the more disconnected you can feel. Why? Because the same skill that lets you see others clearly also reveals how little they see of you. Most people operate on the surface level of emotion: anger, happiness, stress, relief. You live below the surface. You notice the hesitation behind their confidence, the insecurity hidden in their pride, the grief they've buried under endless busyness. You live in that subterranean layer where emotions are raw, unspoken, and often unacknowledged. And once you learn to read people at that level, it becomes almost impossible to unsee it. Here's the paradox. The gift of empathy makes you a bridge, but bridges don't belong to either side. You connect worlds, but you don't quite live in either of them. This is why many emotionally intelligent people describe themselves as outsiders. They fit in everywhere and nowhere. They're welcomed, even depended on, but rarely mirrored back with the same depth. It's a strange kind of exile, surrounded by people yet invisible to them, valued but not fully known, needed but not fully understood. And the irony is that the very thing that should make connection effortless, your ability to sense and feel others, becomes the barrier that sets you apart. This is the paradox of high EQ. The more you understand, the lonelier it becomes. Being emotionally intelligent often feels like being a translator in a foreign land. You understand the language of fear, pride, insecurity, and longing, even when no one else seems to notice it. You decode what's hidden. You bridge misunderstandings. You give people words for feelings they couldn't name themselves. And at first, that feels meaningful. People lean on you. They trust you. They open up in ways they don't with anyone else. But slowly, you realize something unsettling. Translators rarely get to speak their own language. Because while you're busy interpreting the world for others, who is interpreting you? While you're holding space for their storms, who is holding space for yours? This is the hidden loneliness of high EQ. The crowd depends on your clarity, but it doesn't know how to return it. You give people understanding, but when you finally reveal your own complexity, it overwhelms them. They nod politely, they change the subject, or they dismiss you as too intense. And so you stop trying. You edit yourself down to something more palatable. You withhold the parts that would make people uncomfortable. You become fluent in their world, but no one becomes fluent in yours. The result is a quiet form of exile, not isolation, but dissonance. You're surrounded by people, yet disconnected from them. Everyone feels at home in your empathy, but you feel homeless in theirs. It's a strange role to play, essential to the group's harmony, yet invisible within it. You are the one who makes others feel seen, while remaining unseen yourself, and that is the loneliness of the translator. Here's the truth no one tells you. High emotional intelligence without boundaries is a slow kind of self-erasure. You become so tuned to other people's needs, moods, and wounds that you forget your own. You carry storms that aren't yours. You spend energy translating pain that no one asked you to absorb. And over time, connection turns into depletion. Boundaries are what turn empathy from a curse into a gift. Not walls that shut people out, but filters that protect what matters most. Because not everyone deserves your full attention. Not every emotion deserves your intervention. Not every relationship deserves unlimited access to your depth. When you set boundaries, you stop scattering your empathy across everyone, and you start choosing who truly earns it. That choice is what restores balance. It's what keeps you from becoming a bottomless well everyone drinks from but no one refills. Think of it this way. Without boundaries, your empathy is a flood, powerful but destructive. With boundaries, it becomes a river, still powerful, but directed, purposeful, life-giving. And here's the paradox. Boundaries don't shrink connection. They make it real. Because the people who stay, the ones who respect your limits, are the ones who can finally meet you at depth instead of just consuming it. High EQ was never meant to make you available to everyone. It was meant to guide you to the few who can stand at the same level, where empathy isn't just given, but shared. The cure to disconnection isn't lowering your depth. It isn't pretending you don't notice what you notice, and it definitely isn't forcing yourself to belong where you clearly don't. The real cure is finding people who can meet you at the same depth you live in. These communities are rare. Most groups exist at the surface, bound together by convenience, entertainment, or shared illusion. But every so often, you find the exceptions. People who don't flinch at honesty, who don't run from complexity, who don't accuse you of being too much because they've carried the same weight themselves. With them, something shifts. Conversations don't feel like labor. They feel like resonance. You don't have to translate your thoughts into something smaller, safer, more acceptable. You can speak in your native language of depth, and they respond in kind. This is what belonging at high EQ feels like. Not endless performance, not being drained by everyone's needs, but mutual recognition. A rare sense of, finally, I don't have to explain myself. It's not about finding many, it's about finding the few. The ones who don't just take your empathy, but return it. The ones who don't just depend on your clarity, but offer their own. When you find those people, the loneliness collapses. You realize you were never broken for feeling too much. You were simply waiting for the right mirrors. And that is the hidden promise of high emotional intelligence, not fitting everywhere, but finding the rare places where your depth is not a burden. It's home. Emotional intelligence was never meant to make you the caretaker of everyone else's feelings. It was meant to give you clarity about yourself, about others, and about where you truly belong. But here's the danger. If you spend all your energy understanding people who can't or won't understand you, empathy becomes exile. You end up surrounded but unseen, needed but not known. The way out is boundaries. the courage to protect your depth, the wisdom to choose who gets access, and the patience to wait for the few who can meet you there. Because the real measure of emotional intelligence isn't how well you can read others. It's how well you protect yourself while doing it. The gift of high EQ should not cost you belonging. It should guide you to it. Not everywhere, not with everyone, but with the rare few who speak the same hidden language of depth. And when you find them, you'll understand something paradoxical. The very thing that once made you feel disconnected was always leading you to the only connections that truly matter.